The positive relationship between regular exercise and overall health and well-being is broadly accepted in exercise sciences. There is comparatively little understanding, however, on the effects of regular exercise on elderly individuals, including the effects, if any, on longevity. Technological advancements have allowed new questions to be surveyed while a rapidly aging population has demanded answers to the physical decline and potential illnesses that plague their cohorts. Gathering data of the effects of exercise on longevity does pose some obvious limitations because ethical scientific inquiry doesn't allow for humans to be studied in a laboratory over their entire lifespan to measure changes and manipulations in health due to behavior choices. Therefore, the literature must be examined from several perspectives. We'll look at several of those in the course of this lecture. At this time, I'm taking the opportunity to introduce you to what it looks like to be over 40, 50, and 60 years old, even 70, and practice Bikram yoga. Because I can't seem to drag any of you into the hot room, I wanted to take the hot room to you. There you just saw a 71-year-old practicing next to an 18-year-old, and these gentlemen are all over the age 60, performing a camel, a back bend. The folks in this picture are all over 40. In fact, the average class age was 53 on Sunday morning. You can see that the effects of this particular form of physical activity does seem to have some magnificent results, as testified by many of the students who have recovered from surgeries, avoided surgeries, have reduced their cholesterol, blood pressure, lost 40, 50, over 100 pounds, practicing this particular style of asana. Yes, I'm biased. But over 10 years of experience of watching these people transform their own lives has left me with a very, very strong understanding of what physical activity does for the average person, even if they've never been active before. Indeed, we say it's never too late, you're never too sick, you're never too fat, you are never too old to begin once again. And so here we go. So how do we study longevity? Well, longitudinal cross-sectional cohort perspective and retrospective studies really help us out. Additionally, it's important to look at the leading causes of death and disease. And in our country, and largely across the world, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of adult Americans. And now it appears that Alzheimer's disease may be the third leading cause of death, as well as other metabolic disorders, including cancer. It's important to clarify the definitions. The World Health Organization classifies physical activity as any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that requires energy expenditure, and exercise is considered planned physical activity. Aging is defined as a gradual process characterized by a continual progressive modification over one's lifetime. And longevity is typically used to define the accumulation of years or lifespan, but doesn't necessarily include quality of life measures. So for the purposes of consistency, this paper will use the terms physical activity and exercise, as we are familiar. However, the term longevity will hereafter refer to successful and healthy aging and not just the accumulation of years. The following overview of literature, very brief, will provide an understanding of the effects of regular exercise on successful longevity in surveyed populations and from the perspective of chronic illness prevention. Starting now with the Harvard Alumni Health Study. The original participants selected were male alumni that had attended Harvard, completing undergraduate requirements between 1916 and 1950 and were still alive in 1966. Starting with almost 22,000 participants, in 1993 about 12,000 were still participating. Data was collected in 62, 66, 1977, 88, and 1993 on several health and behavioral measures. And this data has been mined continually for further illumination. The first study we're going to look at is a study that was taken from the 1977 male survey from about 18,000 respondents. And men with cardiovascular disease and cancer were eliminated to eliminate the potential of any kind of reduction of activity due to illness. Also, they excluded other confounding factors such as people who did not report their physical activity levels, as well as alcohol consumption and tobacco use, or if they did not report their parental age at time of death. The final group, about 11,000 men, were people who continued to respond to surveys through 1988 and survived past 2000. They calculated some instances of the weekly numbers of blocks walked and flights of stairs climbed, recreation and sporting activities, and this was formulated into a metabolic equation. It was found a U-shaped curve was associated with reduction of stroke because levels of physical activity below 4.5 METs were very weakly associated with the reduced risk of stroke. However, those above 4.5 METs, or about 3,000 calories a week, showed a strong relationship with a distinct reduction of stroke. Higher levels of physical activity did not continue to reduce stroke incidence, thereby producing a U-shaped curve. In 2000, some scientists analyzed the same data. This included about 18,000 alumni who had returned the 1977 questionnaire. There were people that were excluded, including those with cardiovascular disease or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and there were other people who were removed from the study. And similar to the previous publication, a MET calculation was used based on weekly walking, stair climbing, and exercise levels. They did assess this into different groups, as you can see, and after controlling for age, BMI, cigarette smoking, alcohol, early parental death, they were bracketed into age ranges. 2 time periods were examined, and data was independently examined for components of the activity assessment. Walking and stair climbing were found to have an independent relationship with mortality, but this study did not find any relationship between light activity levels and a reduction in mortality. And so it was concluded that mortality was highest in overweight, inactive males, and lowest for not overweight, vigorously active individuals. In the same year, several scientists looked at the relationship between levels of physical activity and coronary heart disease and found an L-shaped association, with those who were at least expending 4,200 calories a week experiencing a great reduction in their coronary heart disease. Now, the exercise referred to is about 30 minutes of vigorous walking, and so you can see that it really is not too much activity. One of the more interesting findings was that physical activity ameliorated other risks, like smoking. Looking now at the Aerobic Center longitudinal study, began in 1970 to study the relationship of activity and health. And we had about 14,000 people from 50 states, volunteers. They took baseline data, a thorough exam, including blood analysis, as well as a graded exercise test and VO2 max. Mortality is recorded for those people who were given a baseline between 87 and 99. And so what did they find? Well, what they were looking for were these deaths that could have been avoided if that risk factor was removed. So in 2013, some people looked at this in accordance with the American Heart Association for lifestyle behavior change factors. And so they looked at these PAFs in relationship to the risk factors as proposed by the American Heart Association. And what they found was that fitness and smoking were the 2 factors associated with lowest survivability, respectively, and low fitness was the bigger risk than smoking, believe it or not. Now, looking at the Nurses' Health Study, in 1976, the Nurses' Health Study began by funding of the National Institute of Health, and they were looking at a lot of nurses, 122,000, in the beginning just mostly looking for factors involved with birth control pills. Many studies came thereafter. One study looked at walking and the effects of cognition in older women and did find that the effect of walking was very helpful. They did some telephone surveys to assess their cognitive ability, and they found that those in the lowest quartile compared to those in the highest quartile were very different in their cognitive ability. Looking now at cardiovascular disease and mortality, about 1 in 4 deaths in the United States are attributed to cardiovascular disease. Exercise physiologists are commonly looking at the effects of exercise on longevity, mortality rather, and morbidity, particularly at aging athlete groups. And so they looked at 122 skiers, cross-country skiers, and found that their death rate was about 31% compared to the general population at 40%. And their highest cause of death was simply age, as opposed to cardiovascular or other diseases. Interesting, they did find that an ST depression found in an ECG 25 years prior actually was a good indicator of later cardiovascular disease. Another study compared masters athletes to previously sedentary individuals after training for 1 year. And after a huge assessment, including a lot of very in-depth measures, the group did 1 year of exercise, and post-testing, they found that the left ventricular mass increased with no change in mass volume relationship. Yet we saw a great increase in VO2 max by 19%. They showed significantly reduced floppy arteries, basically. They had improved arterial tone, and overall the ejection fraction was improved in 1 year of training of previously sedentary older individuals. Looking now at Alzheimer's disease and physical activity. Alzheimer's disease has been receiving a lot more attention lately, and indeed it may even require more. According to the Center for Disease Control, death from Alzheimer's disease has increased 68% since 2000 and continues to climb. But a study published in March of this year refutes that claim as being unintentionally underreported and reports that it may now be the third leading cause of death. The CDC estimates that 5 million adults are currently diagnosed with Alzheimer's with a life expectancy of only 3 to 9 years after diagnosis. So if we go by the numbers from this new study, that number may be significantly more. So what happened was these scientists took data from 2 ongoing cohort studies of aging and Alzheimer's disease, the Religious Order Study and the Rush Memory Aging Project. They were older nuns, priests, and brothers, number 2,566, over 65 years old. And over 8 years, 22% of the study developed Alzheimer's disease. None of them had it prior beginning the study. So 22% developed it. And in this group, the time to death was 3 to 8 years. So all of the participants had postmortem autopsies to determine the cause of death, and they found that it was 37%. Alzheimer's was 37% for those from 75 to 84 and 36% for those 85 and older. So if you use those proportions and calculate the same age group death reports from 2010, well, indeed, the number that perished from Alzheimer's may have been closer to 503,000 rather than the less than 84,000 reported by the CDC. This is definitely alarming and something that should be looked at. Now let's take a look, though, at physical activity and the role of that in the prevention and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. So one study examined the effects of a 24-week exercise intervention on cognitive function in adults who were experiencing some decline, so they were considered to be at risk. This was a group of people from another cohort study, the Fitness for Aging Brain Study, and this took place, people that were over 50 years old, and they were a variety of people that were recruited through media, etc. And they gave them many different cognitive tests, and they used in the treatment group, the exercise group, something called CHAMPS, the Community Healthy Activities Program for Seniors. They also put a pedometer on them, and they took a look at all of their activities. So this was a very long and involved study. They examined the subjects at the onset at 6, 12, and 18 months. And they looked at all kinds of factors of their physical activity. Anybody who walked over 10,000 steps a day was considered to be highly active. Also, they turned in some diaries of their physical activity. There was a control group, and they were given educational materials. So they did this Alzheimer's disease assessment scale, the cognitive assessment, and they looked at the result of those. And what they found, this was the very first study to show that exercise improved cognitive function after 6 months in patients with pre-existing dementia. The treatment individuals improved their scores by 0.26 points, and the control group worsened by 1.04 points. This, by the way, is compared to donepezil. I guess that's an Alzheimer's drug. Their results, their efficacy measures were only 0.02%. So exercise was 0.26, and the drugs that they used to treat Alzheimer's was 0.02. So Also, glucose intolerance is something that we know now may be a contributor to Alzheimer's disease. And of course, as you all know, exercise improves blood glucose measures. Another study was looking at not only blood glucose levels and insulin sensitivity, but also the levels of beta amyloid plasma, and that is associated with Alzheimer's, the plaque that surrounds the neurons. And it was found that those beta amyloid levels did decrease in the physical activity group. A couple of last-minute studies, a 10-year cohort study, showed that walking 4 times a week outside was associated with a 40% decrease in mortality. Another study looked at elderly individuals can extend successful aging with training. And you have to remember to make it enjoyable. It's important to mostly consider the longevity of the program and not intensity as much. So it's very imperative to find an enjoyable activity when you're training someone who is older. So that concludes my presentation. There's a lot more information available, and I'm always happy to chat with you about this. I find this to be very inspiring, and we don't talk much about strenuous yoga practices when we talk about physical activity. So again, I just wanted to show some of these people to you. Those are friends of mine and people that I've been fortunate to work with, and all over 40 and still get ID'd on a regular basis. I'd like to take this opportunity as well to introduce Tony Joe, and she was our Nevada State Senior Champion. And I have it listed on here that she's 57, and in fact, I think she is now 60. So in these pictures, Tony Joe is 60. She has been practicing yoga for about 6 years. She did not look like that when she came in. Here's some of the folks who competed in the National Senior Bikram Championships. And there's some of my fine students. I couldn't get all the pictures in. I'm sorry, guys. You want to age successfully? Keep moving.